Hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. Sit down, please. I'd like to speak English today too, to improve my speaking skill. Let's get it started. Today it is on November 19th, 2023. It's on Sunday and sunny outside. How are you spending Sunday? Do you have a plan for today? Have you got a plan for today? What are you going to do today? Are you going to spend Sunday idling away? Are you going to spend Sunday doing nothing? Are you going to spend Sunday going somewhere? I could hardly sleep last night. I could scarcely sleep last night. I could scarcely sleep last night, for noise from outside was coming. Noise was coming from outside. I could hardly sleep last night. I could scarcely sleep last night, for I had been bothered by the problem, thinking over the problems during the sleep until I got up. I could hardly walk after the hard training. I could scarcely walk after the hard training. Hardly had I stepped outside when it began to rain. Scarcely had I stepped outside before it began to rain. Some people hardly smile. Some people hardly smile. Some people scarcely smile. Some people scarcely smile. I could hardly eat breakfast. I could scarcely eat breakfast. I could hardly eat breakfast this morning. I could scarcely eat breakfast. I could scarcely eat breakfast. I could hardly eat breakfast. I could scarcely eat breakfast. I hardly have appetite in the morning. I scarcely have appetite in the morning. I hardly have appetite for breakfast in the morning. I scarcely have appetite for breakfast in the morning. I hardly have appetite in the morning. I scarcely have appetite in the morning. I hardly have appetite in the morning. I scarcely have appetite in the morning. I hardly have appetite in the morning. I scarcely have appetite in the morning. My boss hardly gets angry. My boss scarcely gets angry. We hardly had snow last winter. We scarcely had winter last winter. The snow hardly accumulated this morning, although I guessed it would. The snow scarcely accumulated, although I guessed it would. The snow scarcely accumulated. The snow hardly piled on the road, on the ground. The snow hardly accumulated on the ground. The snow scarcely accumulated on the ground. Snow scarcely accumulated on the ground. Snow hardly piled up on the road. Snow hardly accumulated on the road. Snow scarcely accumulated on the road. Snow scarcely accumulated on the road. Snow hardly piled up on the road. I hardly ate for breakfast this morning. I scarcely ate for breakfast. Some employees hardly take a break in a day. Some employees scarcely take a break during the work on duty. Some people hardly take a break on duty. Some people scarcely take a break, have a break on duty. There is hardly any money in my bank account. Could you help me? Could you help me? There is hardly any money in my wallet. There is scarcely any money in my bank account. There is hardly any water in the bottle. There is scarcely any water in the bottle. There was scarcely any water in the bottle. There was hardly any wine in the bottle. There was scarcely any tourist in the tourist spot early in the morning. There were hardly any tourists in the tourist spot early in the morning. Hardly any people out there, I'm sure, will agree to my proposals. I'm certain that hardly any participants in this meeting will agree to my proposals. I'm confident that hardly any people will agree to my proposals. I'm certain that scarcely any participants in this meeting will agree with me. Hardly any people have the same interest as mine. Scarcely any people out there have the same interest as mine. I talked to hardly any people today. I talked to hardly any people today. Hardly any people will understand me. Scarcely any people will understand me. Scarcely any people are like me. Hardly any people are like me. Scarcely any people have common with me. Hardly any people have common with me. Although there was hardly any possibility, I tried and I obtained the victory. Although there was a little hope and possibility, I tried and I won. Although there was hardly any hope nor possibility, I tried with confidence coming out from somewhere, and I won, to my surprise, to not only my surprise but also others. Although there was hardly any hope or possibility, I challenged it and I won, to my surprise. Although there was hardly any possibility, he took the chance. There is hardly any water in the bottle. There is hardly any money in my bank account. There is hardly any money in my wallet. There is scarcely any money in my wallet. There is hardly 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 any money in my wallet. There is scarcely any money in my wallet. I was told that there was hardly any possibility that I would pass examination. I was told that there was scarcely any possibility that I would pass examination. I was told that there was hardly any possibility that I would pass the examination, but I won and made them surprised, make them took by surprise, make them taken by surprise. Hardly any tasks have been completed now. Scarcely any tasks have been completed. Scarcely any tasks have been completed. Scarcely any the pile of tasks have been completed. Hardly any the pile of tasks have been completed. Hardly any new greeting cards have been sent. Scarcely any new greeting cards have been sent. There were hardly any tourists in the tourist spot early in the morning. I use the strategy to go to the restaurant while there is hardly any customers, like 3 o'clock p.m. I go to the restaurant by changing the time, but during the different time when there are hardly any customers. I usually go to the restaurant during the different time from the time when it is usually crowded with customers in order to avoid congestion. In order to avoid congestion. Although there was hardly any hope or possibility, I took the chance. Although there is scarcely any hope or possibility, he is somehow optimistic. Although there was hardly any hope or possibility, the CEO was optimistic. The CEO kept optimistic. Although there was scarcely any hope nor possibility, the CEO remained optimistic, stayed optimistic, remained optimistic, kept optimistic. There was hardly any wine in the bottle. There was hardly any wine in the bottle. There was hardly any water in the bottle. I gave up having a shop at the supermarket, for I realized that there was hardly any money in my wallet. To my shock, there was scarcely any money in my wallet, so I gave up having a shop at the supermarket. I came home. To my disappointment, there was scarcely any money in my wallet. To my disappointment, there was scarcely any money in my wallet. To my disappointment, there was hardly any money in my wallet, ending up going home. To my disappointment, there was scarcely any money in my wallet, ending up withdrawing some from the ATM. Hardly any vegetables bloomed from the sand soil for a reason. Hardly any tourists visited the tourist spot during the pandemic. Scarcely any tourists visited the tourist spot during the pandemic. Scarcely any customers buy the high-end model of the product. Hardly any customers buy the high-end model of the product. Hardly any people can reach the level. Scarcely any people can reach the level. Few people can reach the level. Few people can reach the level. Scarcely any people can reach the level. Hardly any people reach the level. Hardly any people can reach the level. Scarcely any people can reach the level. Hardly any people can reach the level. Scarcely any people can reach the level. Hardly any people can reach the level. Scarcely any people can reach the level. Hardly any people can reach the level. Hardly any people can reach the level. Scarcely 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 any food fighters could eat all of the menu within the limited time. Hardly any food fighters could eat all of the menu served in the restaurant within the limited time. I talked with hardly anybody in the school. I got acquainted with hardly any students in the school. I got acquainted with hardly anybody in the school. Hardly any students could solve the math problems. Hardly any pianist can play the piece. Scarcely any pianist can the piece. There are scarcely any things which satisfy me. There are hardly any interesting things to satisfy me enough. Hardly any music will satisfy the composer, the famous composer, the famous musician. Scarcely any pieces in the world impress him enough. Hardly any songs impress him enough. Scarcely any songs impress him enough. Scarcely any songs impress him enough. Hardly any songs impress him enough. Scarcely any songs impress him enough. Hardly any music impress him enough. Hardly any music impress him enough. I'm certain that hardly any participants will agree with me regarding my proposals. I'm sure that scarcely any participants in this meeting will agree to my proposals. I'm sure that hardly any participants will agree to my proposals. I'm sure that hardly any participants will agree to my proposals. I'm certain that scarcely any participants will agree to my proposals. I'm confident that hardly any participants will agree to my proposals. Hardly any people have the same interest as mine. Scarcely any people have the same interest as mine. Scarcely any people have the same point of view as mine. Hardly any people have the same interests, have same viewpoints as mine. Hardly any people out there have the same point of view as mine. Hardly any people have the same standpoints as mine. Hardly any people have the same standpoint as mine. Scarcely any people have the same viewpoint as mine. There are hardly any books in the room. There are hardly any merchandises in the store. There are hardly any popular songs in the music store. There are scarcely any music sheets of popular songs in the store, only mostly composed of classic music sheet. Classical music sheets. There are hardly any objects in the room. There are scarcely any objects in the room to concentrate on what you have to do. It's like only desk and chair and a pen case. There are scarcely any object in the room. There are scarcely any objects in the room. Because he is a minimalist. There are scarcely any objects in his room because he is a minimalist. There are scarcely any objects in his room. There are hardly any objects in his room. There are scarcely any objects in his room, for he is a minimalist. There are scarcely any objects in his room, for he is a minimalist. There are scarcely any objects in his room. There are hardly any objects in his room, for she is a minimalist. Some people hardly ever smile. Some people seldom smile. Some people rarely smile. Some people seldom if ever smile. Some people rarely if ever smile. Some people hardly ever smile. Some people hardly ever smile. I rarely drink alcoholic beverages. I hardly ever drink alcoholic beverages. I scarcely 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 ever drink alcoholic beverages. Our general manager scarcely ever visits our branch office. Our section in chief hardly ever visits our branch office. I rarely if ever eat out. I seldom if ever eat out. I hardly ever eat out. I scarcely ever eat out. The temperature hardly ever goes down more than 10 degrees in the region. The temperature hardly ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius in the prefecture. The temperature hardly ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius in the region. The temperature scarcely ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius. The temperature hardly ever goes under 0 degrees Celsius in the region. The temperature hardly ever goes under the 10 degrees Celsius in the region. The temperature scarcely ever goes under 0 degrees Celsius. The pianist hardly ever make a mistake. The pianist scarcely ever make a mistake. The teacher scarcely ever sneezes. The teacher hardly ever sneezes. The teacher hardly ever yawns. The teacher scarcely ever yawns. I hardly ever leave food on the menu. I scarcely ever leave food on the menu. I hardly ever work overtime. I scarcely ever work overtime. I hardly ever work overtime. I scarcely ever work overtime. I hardly ever work overtime. I scarcely ever work overtime. I hardly ever work overtime. Scarcely ever work overtime. I scarcely ever work overtime. I hardly ever work overtime. Temperature hardly ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius in the country. Temperature hardly ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius in the prefecture. Temperature scarcely ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius in the region. Temperature rarely goes under 10 degrees Celsius in the region. Temperature hardly ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius in the region. Temperature hardly ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius. Temperature scarcely ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius. Temperature hardly ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius. Temperature scarcely ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius. Temperature hardly ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius. Temperature scarcely ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius. Temperature hardly ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius. Temperature scarcely ever goes under 10 degrees Celsius. The employee hardly ever takes a break on duty. The employee scarcely ever takes a break. The employee hardly ever takes a break. The employee scarcely ever takes a break. I hardly ever make a careless mistake. I scarcely ever make a careless mistake. I hardly ever make a minor mistake. I scarcely ever make a minor mistake. I had hardly stepped outside when it began to rain. I had hardly stepped outside it when it began to rain. Hardly had I stepped outside when it began to rain. I had hardly arrived at the arena when the game started. Hardly had I arrived at the arena when the game started. I had hardly arrived at home when I got emergency call. Hardly had I arrived at home when I got the emergency call. I got the emergency call. I got the emergency call. I had scarcely stepped outside before it began to rain. Scarcely had I stepped outside before it began to rain. Scarcely had I stepped outside before it began to rain. I had scarcely stepped outside before it began to rain. Scarcely had I stepped outside before it began to rain. Scarcely had I stepped outside before it began to rain. The audiences had hardly listened to the beautiful sound given off by the pianist when they started to cry. Hardly had the audiences listened to the beautiful sound made by the pianist when they started to cry, not rain. The audience had scarcely listened to the beautiful sound made by the orchestra before they started to cry. Scarcely had the audience listened to the beautiful sound made by the orchestra before they started to cry. I rarely eat ramen. I seldom eat ramen outside. He rarely smiles. He seldom smiles. He seldom smiles. He rarely smiles. Some people rarely read a book. Some people seldom read a book. Some people seldom read a book. Some people rarely read a book. Our general manager rarely visits our branch office. Our general manager seldom visits our branch office. Our general manager rarely visits our branch office. Our general manager seldom visits our branch office. Our general manager rarely, if ever, visits our branch office. Our general manager seldom visits our branch office. Temperature rarely, if ever, goes under 10 degrees Celsius in the region. Temperature scarcely, if ever, seldom, if ever, goes under 10 degrees Celsius in the region. I can rarely come across rainbow. I can seldom come across rainbow. I can seldom come across a rainbow. I can rarely run into a rainbow. I can rarely come across a rainbow. I can seldom come across a rainbow. I can rarely run into a rainbow. I can seldom run into a rainbow. I can rarely 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 run into a rainbow. The teacher rarely, if ever, praises his students, even if he or she performs very well. The teacher never praises his students. The teacher rarely, if ever, praises his students, even if they perform very well, unless they do super very well, beyond expectations. The teacher seldom, if ever, praises his students, even if they perform very well on the stage, practice, and so on. The teacher rarely, if ever, praises his students. I rarely go on a foreign trip. I seldom, if ever, go on a foreign trip. The strong Superman rarely, if ever, catch a cold. The healthy person seldom, if ever, catch a cold. The healthy person rarely, if ever, catch a cold. The healthy person seldom, if ever, catch a cold. The healthy person rarely catch a cold. The healthy person rarely, if ever, catch a cold. The healthy person, like her, seldom, if ever, catch a cold. I wish I were as strong as her. I wish I were as healthy as her. The Shop popular among tourists. Rarely if ever has a day off. The shop popular among many tourists. Seldom if ever has a day off. The very popular restaurant. Seldom if ever has a day off. The very popular restaurant. Rarely if ever has a day off. The restaurant reputed very well among the tourists. Rarely if ever has a day off. The shop seldom if ever has a day off. I rarely if ever go downtown. I seldom if ever go downtown to avoid congestion. I rarely if ever eat lunch at a very popular restaurant, always crowded with customers. I seldom if ever have lunch at a popular restaurant, always crowded with customers. I rarely if ever eat lunch at a restaurant where there are many people. I seldom if ever eat lunch at a restaurant crowded with people all the time. I seldom if ever have a lunch at a restaurant always crowded with people. I seldom if ever eat lunch. I seldom if ever eat lunch at a restaurant always crowded with customers. I seldom if ever eat lunch at a restaurant always packed with customers. I rarely if ever eat lunch at a restaurant always packed with customers. The employee rarely if ever gets a paid leave. The employee seldom if ever uses the paid leave. Some people rarely if ever socialize with people. Some people seldom if ever socialize with people. I rarely if ever speak to a stranger unless I ask directions to somewhere. I seldom if ever speak to a stranger unless I ask directions. She rarely if ever eats meat. She seldom if ever eat meats. She rarely if ever eat meats. She seldom if ever eats meat. She rarely if ever eats meat. She rarely, if ever, eats meat. She seldom, if ever, eats meats. She seldom, if ever, eats meat. She seldom, if ever, eats meat. She rarely, 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 if ever, eats meat. She seldom, if ever, eats meat. Okay, I will finish speaking here. Thank you for watching. See you next time. See you.